I still remember the last time I heard my daughter's scream, not because it was the loudest, but because it was the last. After that night, no sound ever came out of her throat the same way again. You never forget a moment like that. Not when you're a mother. Not when it's your child whose voice breaks from terror. My name is Juanita Hopkins. I'm 74 years old now, living quietly in a small home tucked in the woods outside Wallace, Idaho. Most days, it's just me, my tabby cat Henry, and the sound of wind rustling through pine trees. From the outside, you'd think peace had settled over my life like a fresh snowfall. But beneath that calm lies a past that still burns through my bones every night. Last week, I heard a child scream from the house across the road, just a brief, startled shriek. It was probably nothing, a tumble off a bike, maybe a fight over a toy, but it triggered something deep in me. My heart pounded. My breath caught in my throat. I froze in place, coffee mug trembling in my hand, because for a brief second, I thought it was her Emily, my baby girl. I used to believe love would fix everything, that if you loved hard enough, forgave enough, stayed long enough, things would eventually get better. That's what I told myself during the early years of my marriage to Randall Hopkins. We married when I was 26, back in 1977, and back then, I was a soft-spoken, church-going woman who still believed people could change. Randall was older than me by 3 years, charming in that quiet way country men sometimes are polite at potlucks, quick to help with a neighbor's fence, always the one to say grace at family dinners. Folks liked him, so did I. He came from a long line of loggers and hunters. He had strong arms, steady hands, and eyes the color of worn-out denim. I remember thinking he'd be the kind of man who'd build a home, not tear one apart. Our wedding was small, just a gathering in the town church, with pot roast and lemon cake afterward. Nothing fancy, but it felt like the start of something real. We bought a little house on the edge of town, surrounded by woods, far from any noise. I thought it was perfect. Randall liked the quiet, said it gave him space to think. When I found out I was pregnant 2 years later, he didn't say much, just nodded and said, "All right then." But when Emily was born in late October of 1979, he held her so gently. It made me believe every doubt I had before was just nerves. I remember cradling her under a hand-stitched quilt, her little fingers curling around mine. I whispered promises to her while Randall stood silently by the window, cigarette burning in his hand. At first, things were fine, quiet, simple. Randall went to work at the mill. I stayed home with Emily. I baked bread, hung laundry, read stories to her in the living room. Emily loved books, even before she could read. She'd sit in my lap and turn the pages, pretending to know the words. She giggled easily, especially when I made animal sounds. But something in Randall shifted when Emily turned 5. He grew tense, snappier, quick to scold her if she dropped a cup or laughed too loud. "Don't raise no brat," he'd mutter. I told myself it was just old-fashioned parenting. He'd been raised tough, and maybe he thought that's what kids needed. I tried to balance it out with more hugs, more lullabies, more love. But the love of a mother can only stretch so far when the walls around her begin to close in. By the time Emily was 8, she barely spoke around her father. Her little body stiffened every time he walked into the room. At night, she clung to me in bed, whispering that she didn't want to sleep alone. I asked her why, and all she'd say was, "Daddy's scary when he's mad." Still, I told myself it couldn't be that bad. Randall never raised a hand to me. He never screamed. But that was the danger. I was looking for noise when all the harm was done in silence. I didn't know then, not yet, just how far it had already gone. All I had were whispers, shadows, and a growing ache inside my chest that I refused to name. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe the man I married could ever hurt our child. But the truth doesn't wait for your permission. It comes crashing in loud, sharp, undeniable. And when it did, I was forced to choose stay blind to keep the peace, or open my eyes and fight for my child before it was too late. I just didn't know how high the price of that truth would be. Looking back now, I can see the signs were always there, only I didn't want to see them. Or maybe I was just too desperate to believe in the dream I'd built in my head. The first few years of marriage with Randall were quiet, like the snowy winters in Wallace. We lived on a narrow stretch of land near the edge of the forest, surrounded by ponderosa pines and gravel roads. It was the kind of place where folks minded their own business. We had privacy, too much of it, I would come to realize. Randall had always been a man of few words, but back then I mistook silence for steadiness. When he didn't talk, I filled in the blanks, told myself he was thoughtful, reserved, dependable. I didn't realize that silence could also be a hiding place. We went to church most Sundays. Randall wore the same dark jacket every week, always nodding to the preacher but never staying for fellowship. Can't stand small talk, he'd mutter. People always yapping about nothing. I used to laugh nervously at that. I thought it made him seem no nonsense, like my father. But my father never made me feel like I was walking on a frozen lake that could crack at any second. Randall had a way of making me feel small without ever raising his voice. If dinner was overcooked, he'd push his plate aside and say nothing, just a look. That look said more than words ever could. If I spent money on something he didn't approve of, a new sweater, an extra can of coffee, he'd shake his head and make a slow, tight-lipped hum. It was a hum I grew to dread. Still, I told myself I was lucky. Other women had it worse. Randall didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't cheat. He came home every night, paid the bills, mowed the lawn. What right did I have to complain when Emily was born? I felt a light return to my life. She was a beautiful baby, rosy cheeks, thick dark hair, and these wide blue eyes that took in everything. Randall didn't show much emotion at first, but he held her the night we brought her home. I remember watching his hands, calloused and strong, cradle her so delicately. I thought maybe he'd soften with her in his arms. For a while, it seemed like he did. When Emily was a toddler, Randall would build her little wooden toys in his shed, simple things like animals or blocks. He rarely smiled, but when he handed her a new toy, there was something gentle in his eyes. I clung to that. I made a shrine of those moments, convinced they proved he was a good man. But the tenderness didn't last. When Emily turned 5, everything started to shift. It was small at first, little scoldings that felt too sharp for a child. Don't cry. Big girls don't cry. Sit still. You're too loud. Stop whining or I'll give you a reason to. I'd watch from the doorway, folding laundry, trying not to interfere. Randall didn't like to be questioned. Don't undermine me in front of her, he said once, after I told him to go easy. She needs discipline. At night, I'd sneak into Emily's room after Randall had gone to sleep. I'd lie beside her, brushing her hair with my fingers, humming the lullabies my mother used to sing to me. I could feel her little body relax only after I was near. She wouldn't say much, but her hands would grip the hem of my nightgown, as if afraid I'd vanish. I didn't understand how afraid she really was. I blamed the school for her sudden silence. I thought maybe the other kids weren't being friendly. I even wondered if she was just shy by nature. But when her kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Hollister, pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if everything was all right at home, I felt my heart sink. "She flinches sometimes," she said gently, "especially when a grown man raises his voice nearby, and she has some bruises on her arm. She says she fell, but, that word hung in the air like smoke." I nodded politely and said I'd look into it. I smiled the way women are taught to smile when we're dying inside. That night, I asked Randall directly, for the first time, "Did you hit her?" He stared at me from his chair by the fireplace. He didn't blink, didn't even seem surprised. "She's clumsy," he said. "You know that. She's scared of you. She's scared because you coddle her. You're making her weak." His words sliced through me, but I didn't say anything more. I walked back into the kitchen, hands trembling as I rinsed the dishes. In my mind, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe Emily needed firmer rules. Maybe I was imagining things. That's the cruelty of slow abuse. It doesn't break you all at once. It erodes you, one quiet moment at a time, until your sense of reality begins to warp. I wasn't ready to admit what was happening. Not yet. But deep inside, I think I already knew. The day would come when I couldn't deny it any longer. Emily was 8 when I noticed she had stopped laughing altogether. Not just around her father, everywhere. She used to giggle when we read stories, especially the ones where animals wore clothes and talked in silly voices. I used to do impressions: croaky frogs, posh British foxes, southern bell pigs. She would squeal and roll onto the carpet, holding her stomach from laughing so hard. But one evening, as I read her favorite story, The Adventures of Jumpy Jack Rabbit, she just sat there, unmoved. I tried the voice. Nothing. I leaned in and tickled her side. She flinched so sharply, she nearly fell backward off the sofa. My heart dropped. "Sweetheart," I whispered. She blinked, her eyes wide with fear. Then she forced a smile so quick, so mechanical, I knew it wasn't real. "I'm just tired, Mama," she mumbled. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside Randall, staring at the ceiling while his snoring filled the room. My mind replayed every bruise, every excuse, every stiff movement in Emily's tiny body. The next morning, I noticed the way she walked to the bathroom, slowly, favoring one side. She tried to hide it, but I saw. "Are you sore, baby?" I asked gently. She paused, then nodded. I tripped on the porch steps, but I had swept the porch that morning. The steps were clear. Still, I said nothing, not because I didn't believe her, but because I did. I believed that whatever made her sore had happened in our house, under my roof, while I was there. A few days later, I went to her room to change her sheets and found a small bundle of paper tucked under her mattress. Crayon drawings. Some were happy sunshine, a swing set, a picture of me holding her hand, but others. One picture showed a stick figure girl behind bars. Another showed a big man with angry red scribbles for eyes standing over a tiny figure curled up in a corner. In thick, clumsy letters, she had written "No, no, no" across the page. I stared at the drawings for a long time. My stomach turned. My legs gave out beneath me, and I sank to the floor with them spread across my lap. When Randall came home that night, I watched him more carefully. He kissed me on the cheek, poured himself iced tea, and sat at the kitchen table with his back straight as a board. When Emily walked in from the hallway, I saw the shift in her posture. She shrank. Her steps got smaller. She stared at the floor as she walked past him. She never once looked him in the eye, and he never looked at her, not like a father, not like anything good. I tried to talk to her before bed. "Emily, do you want to tell me something?" She hesitated. Her lips parted. Then her whole body tensed. She shook her head violently and pulled the covers up to her chin. "Are you scared of Daddy?" Her eyes watered, but she didn't answer. "Emily, I promise Mama's here. You can tell me anything." But she whispered, "He said I'd go away if I told." That broke me. I sat with her until she fell asleep, then tiptoed back to my bedroom. Randall was already in bed, reading the newspaper like nothing had ever happened, like he hadn't just left a child in pieces. I stood there in the doorway for a long time, just watching him breathe. And something shifted in me that night. Something hard and cold settled behind my ribs. I didn't confront him, not yet. I didn't scream or pack our bags and run, because part of me was still terrified. He controlled the bank account, the truck, the house. My name was on the deed, but he made sure I always felt like a guest, a privileged guest, but a guest nonetheless. And I knew Randall wouldn't let us leave quietly. Still, the seed was planted. A few weeks later, I received a note from Emily's teacher again. She'd started wetting herself in class. She was withdrawn. She refused to participate in group work. She needs help. The note read, "Please." I knew what I had to do. I called the local family clinic under the pretense of setting up a wellness check. But when we arrived, I quietly pulled the nurse aside and said, "Please screen for signs of abuse." The nurse looked startled, then softened her voice. "Is the father involved?" I nodded. "Yes." "And he can't know I brought her here." They ran the exam. I sat in the hallway, my hands clenching the hem of my cardigan until my knuckles turned white. When the doctor came out, his face was grim. "There are signs," he said quietly. "Bruising, consistent with being struck. Emotional indicators as well." She barely spoke during the exam. "We'll need to report this." My breath caught. I nodded slowly. "Do what you have to do." That evening, I looked Randall in the eye for the first time in months and said, "I'm taking Emily to stay with my sister for a while." He stared at me coldly. "The hell you are. She's not safe here. And you think she'll be safer out there. You think anybody's going to believe you." His voice didn't rise. That was the terrifying part. He said it so calmly, so confidently. It sent chills through my skin. He stood up, towering over me. "You try anything stupid, Juanita, and I'll make sure you both disappear." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hallway outside Emily's room, holding a kitchen knife in my lap, trembling the whole time. The truth had finally taken shape. The next step would be getting us out alive. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a minefield in my own home. Every step, every glance, every word could set Randall off, and not just at me, but at Emily. He knew I'd gone behind his back with the doctor. I never told him, but he could feel it. The way I watched him, the way I held Emily tighter than usual, he noticed. Randall was smart in all the worst ways. He never came at you with open fists. He used control, silence, and fear like a craftsman uses tools. Emily had started whispering in her sleep, just soft, frightened whimpers. She'd wake up with her pajamas damp from sweat, her eyes glassy and haunted. One night, she woke up screaming and clutched at her throat. No sound came out. Her voice, once high and sweet, was now hoarse, raspy, like she'd been screaming underwater. I sat on the edge of her bed, running my fingers through her tangled hair, and asked gently, "Was it a nightmare, baby?" She shook her head. He hurt me again." That was the first time she said it out loud. The words were barely more than breath, but they hit me harder than any slap ever could. I held her so tightly I worried I might crush her. I wanted to press her against my chest and shield her from everything, especially the man asleep just down the hall. The man I had once promised to love and obey. The man I had brought into her life. The next morning, I called the Women's Crisis Center in Spokane under the guise of asking about a volunteer program. I kept my voice low, my tone casual. But the woman on the other end of the line knew better. "You're not calling about volunteering, are you?" she asked gently. I hesitated. No. I need to know how to get my daughter and me out of here. Safely. She gave me the name of a woman, Martha Green, said she could meet me in person, somewhere neutral, and walk me through a plan, not just how to leave, but how to disappear, how to survive. We arranged to meet at the church community pantry that Friday. I told Randall I was helping with food distribution, something I'd done before. He didn't question it. That night, I met Martha behind the building, by the loading dock. She was maybe in her early 50s, with silver-streaked curls and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and still had room for hope. "You don't have to do it alone," she said, as she handed me a pamphlet with a quiet but firm grip. "We've helped dozens of women like you. It's not easy. It's never easy. But you can get out." We spent nearly an hour building a plan. I'd stash a bag in the shed behind the house money, clothes, Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit, her birth certificate. I'd wait until Randall had a night shift at the mill or went on a hunting trip, and I'd make sure someone knew where I was going. That part was important. But the next week, Randall changed. He became attentive, not warm, not loving, but observant. He started noticing every little thing. He asked where I went, checked my pockets when I did laundry, sniffed my breath for alcohol or deceit. I realized I had less time than I thought. One night, after dinner, he slammed his fork down hard enough to crack the plate. "You think I'm stupid," he hissed. Emily froze mid-bite, her little hands shaking. "Where were you last Friday?" "Juanita." I stood tall. I had to, helping at the church. You know that. He rose slowly. "You think you can sneak around me, hide things from me." Emily dropped her fork. It clattered against the plate like a gunshot. Randall turned toward her, rage brewing behind his eyes. I stepped between them before he could take a single step. "You don't touch her," I said, my voice shaking but firm. He stared at me, unblinking. "She needs to learn respect. No, she needs to be safe." His lip curled. "She's mine, my child." "No, she's not your possession," I said. "She's a little girl, and you're hurting her." That was the moment the mask slipped completely. Randall stepped forward, fast. He grabbed my wrist with a grip so tight I heard something pop. I yelped. He leaned in so close I could smell the sourness of his breath. "If you ever try to take her from me," he whispered, "you won't live long enough to regret it." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Then you better kill me right now," because I knew I wasn't staying another night under that roof, not with him. As soon as he left for the mill the next morning, I yanked the emergency bag from the shed, grabbed Emily's hand, and ran. We didn't even take the truck. I didn't want him to track the plates. We walked a mile to the gas station, where Martha had arranged for a volunteer named Darlene to pick us up. Darlene was a retired nurse, about my age now, with a steel heart and soft eyes. "You're safe now," she said as we climbed into her van. "He can't hurt you here." Emily curled into my lap the whole ride to Spokane. She didn't speak. Her throat was sore, but her eyes stayed wide open, watching the trees blur by as we left our life behind. We arrived at the shelter just after sunset. It was an old craftsman-style house turned into a sanctuary for women like me. Warm beds, hot meals, no questions asked. That night, as I tucked Emily into a real bed with clean sheets, she reached for her stuffed rabbit and whispered, "Is he gone?" "Yes," I said, brushing her hair from her forehead. "He's gone." She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. No sound came out. She looked up at me, eyes full of tears. "I can't talk." I held her tightly. "You don't have to. Not tonight." She nodded, laid her head on the pillow, and fell asleep within minutes. I sat beside her until dawn, afraid to close my eyes in case it all vanished. But it didn't. This was real. We were safe. And tomorrow, I would begin the hardest part of all, not running, not hiding, but healing. The morning after our escape felt unreal. I woke up before the sun rose, still sitting upright in the chair next to Emily's bed, my back stiff, neck sore, but none of that mattered because she was safe. She was alive, and for the first time in years, she had slept through the night without waking in terror. At the shelter, everything moved gently. The women there spoke in soft tones. No sudden noises, no slammed doors, just quiet, careful kindness. It was a kind of safety I hadn't known we needed until we had it. Martha Green came by that morning with a thermos of coffee and a manila envelope full of forms. "We're going to make this official," she said as she slid it across the table. "And we're going to do it smart. We'll get you a lawyer, a counselor, and a protective order all before he even knows where you are." I nodded, heart pounding. "What if he finds us first?" "He won't," she said calmly. "He doesn't know where you are, and you didn't take the truck. You did everything right, but it still didn't feel right. Not yet." Later that day, I sat in a small office with Dr. Meredith Langley, the child psychologist Martha had recommended. She had kind, searching eyes and a quiet voice that seemed to melt the air around her. Emily sat across from her on the little corduroy couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her lips slightly parted, but silent. "It's okay if she doesn't speak yet," Dr. Langley said gently, glancing over at me. "Children who experience trauma this deep, especially at the hands of someone they're supposed to trust, can lose their voice, sometimes temporarily, sometimes longer. It's the body's way of protecting itself." I reached across the space between us and laid a hand over Emily's. She didn't look at me, but she didn't pull away either. That meant something. She told me once, I said, that he said she'd go away if she told. Dr. Langley nodded slowly. "Threats like that can stick, but she's here now, and she has you. That's more than a lot of kids ever get. Hearing that she has you unlocked something inside me, a kind of breath I'd been holding for years. I had her. I still had her. And no matter how broken I felt, I was still the one thing standing between her and that monster." Later that week, Martha arranged a meeting with a police officer who specialized in family abuse cases. His name was Darren McCall, a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and the kind of patience most people don't expect from law enforcement. He sat across from me at the shelter's dining room table with a yellow legal pad and a tape recorder. "I want to hear everything," he said. And I know it won't be easy. It wasn't, for nearly 2 hours. I told him everything: Randall's silence, the bruises, Emily's fear, the drawings I'd found, the doctor's findings, the threats he made to me. I showed him the pictures I'd secretly taken, the fading marks on Emily's wrists, the note from her teacher, the doctor's summary from the clinic visit. Darren didn't interrupt once. He just listened, his pen moving steadily across the page. When I finished, I realized I was gripping my elbows so tightly my hands had gone numb. He clicked off the recorder. "We'll need to bring him in for questioning," he said. "And with your permission, we'll interview Emily too with support present. We'll build a case that sticks." "You believe me?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He looked me in the eye. "Yes, I believe you." And I believe her. That night, I told Emily that the police were going to help us now. She didn't respond. But later, I found a crayon drawing on her pillow a picture of a small girl holding her mom's hand, standing next to a smiling police officer. It was the first drawing she'd done since we left. It gave me strength. We filed for an emergency protective order the next day. Randall would be served papers and banned from approaching us under any circumstance. A formal investigation was opened, and the shelter's lawyer began helping us file for full custody and divorce. I hadn't even thought about that word in years. Divorce. It sounded so simple, so clean. But what we were doing was anything but. Randall didn't take it well. He found out sooner than we expected, probably through one of the local court notices or someone at the post office. Wallace was still a small town, and gossip moved fast. That night, the shelter's front desk called my room. "Juanita," they said quietly. We had a man show up asking questions. Tall, blue jacket, gray hair. He didn't give a name, but he said he was just looking for someone who owes him answers. We turned him away and reported it. "But we're moving you and Emily to a secure facility just to be safe." Fear wrapped around my ribs like barbed wire. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Emily sleep. I wanted to tell her everything was okay, but I didn't know if that was true yet. Before dawn, a social worker named Denise helped us pack our few things and drove us an hour north to a second shelter, a safer one, with coded entries and no signage. It felt like a bunker, but in that moment, it was a fortress. We were moved, but we were not broken, and that mattered more than anything. In the coming days, Emily began to whisper again, just single words. Water, rabbit, mama, each one a lifeline thrown into a sea I thought we might drown in. And for the first time, I began to see something in her I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. I still wasn't sure what justice would look like, but I knew one thing with complete certainty. I would not stop until she had it. The morning after we moved to the new shelter, Emily whispered something that stopped me in my tracks. "Will he find us here too?" I crouched beside her, holding her tiny hands, so thin and cold, even under the blanket. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "He won't. I promise you we're somewhere safe now, somewhere he can't reach us." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The fear of Randall didn't vanish just because we changed locations. It lingered like smoke in my lungs. I jumped at every knock on the door, flinched when the phone rang, and scanned every face on the street like I was being hunted. Because in a way, I was. 2 days after Randall was served the protective order, Officer Darren McCall contacted me. He's angry, he said bluntly, but he hasn't broken any laws yet. He hasn't contacted you directly. He's hovering, but he's being careful. He's waiting for the right moment, I said. Yes, Darren agreed, but we're watching. If he tries anything at all, we'll be there. The problem was, Randall didn't need to break in to hurt us. His presence, the memory of his threats, the fear he'd planted in Emily, he was still inside our lives, whether we saw him or not. One night, it all came to a head. It was just after 9:00 p.m. The shelter had quieted down. Emily had fallen asleep next to me after reading a picture book aloud in her newly recovering voice. She still couldn't raise it much above a whisper, but that whisper now had words. That was victory. I was sipping lukewarm tea in the kitchenette when I heard something outside, a crunching sound, like gravel under boots. I froze. I peeked out the blinds. There he was, Randall, standing by the corner of the building, half in shadow. He wore his old canvas jacket and a ball cap pulled low over his eyes. His arms were crossed, and he was staring directly at the shelter's front door. I grabbed the emergency phone near the entrance and called Darren's number. "He's here," I whispered, "right outside." "Stay inside," he ordered. "We're on the way." Minutes passed like hours. Randall didn't move. He just waited, patient as a hunter, watching. And then he started toward the building. I ran to Emily's room and locked the door behind us. I knelt beside her bed and pulled her close. "Baby, listen to me," I said, my voice shaking. "You're going to hear some loud noises. Okay, but you're safe. You're safe. Just stay here. Don't open this door." She looked terrified, but she nodded. Then I turned and faced the door, my hand on the knob, body trembling. I didn't have a weapon, just my voice, just my will. Randall's voice echoed through the hallway seconds later. "Juanita, you open this damn door." He was inside. Someone had forgotten to fully latch the entrance. He was in the building. "Emily belongs with me." He shouted, his boots stomping down the hallway. I stepped out of the room before he could reach her. He stopped when he saw me. His face was red, eyes wild, hands clenched into fists. But he was shaking. He hadn't expected to see me standing tall. "She's not yours," I said, steadying my voice. "You lost her the moment you hurt her. You don't get to be her father anymore. You think you're a saint?" He sneered. "You think they'll believe you. I don't care what you believe anymore." I said. The truth already spoke, and it screamed. He moved toward me. I braced myself, ready to do anything to take a hit, to block him from Emily, to go down fighting. But before he could reach me, flashing red and blue lights filled the windows. "Police," a voice boomed. "Drop to your knees. Randall Hopkins' hands, where we can see them." Randall froze. I saw it, the calculation in his eyes, the sudden panic, and then resignation. He slowly raised his arms as officers swarmed through the hallway, pinned him to the floor, and cuffed him with professional force. Darren was among them. He looked at me and nodded once, eyes full of quiet fury. "I told you we'd be watching," he said. As they dragged Randall out of the shelter, Emily stepped from the room, her eyes wide. She looked at the flashing lights, at the officers, at Randall's head hanging low. Then she looked at me. "Is it over?" she asked softly. I dropped to my knees and wrapped my arms around her. "Yes, baby, it's over." Randall was arrested on charges of violating a protection order, endangering a child, and obstruction of justice. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few months, we worked closely with a lawyer, Dr. Langley, and Darren to build the full case. Testimonies were gathered. Medical evaluations were presented. Emily's drawings were used as evidence. So were the photographs. The shelter staff testified. So did Martha and the nurse from the clinic. And then Emily. She stood before a judge, gripping her rabbit and speaking with her soft, newly returned voice. "He hurt me," she said. "My daddy hurt me, and I don't want to go back." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The judge granted me full custody. Randall was sentenced to 18 years in prison with no possibility of early parole. That night, Emily and I walked out of that courthouse hand in hand, breathing freely for the first time in years. Not everything was healed, but something inside us had finally broken loose from the cage. Freedom. The first time Emily laughed again, it was over something small. We had moved into a modest apartment on the second floor of an old brick building in Spokane. The shelter helped us get the place, and I found a part-time job shelving books at the public library. The apartment had creaky floors, a leaky faucet in the kitchen, and neighbors who played the radio too loud, but it was ours. One rainy Saturday morning, I was trying to flip pancakes while humming off-key to a Patsy Cline song. Emily sat at the tiny table, still in her pajamas, watching me with sleepy eyes. As I reached too far across the counter, the spatula slipped out of my hand and hit the wall with a loud slap, followed by a lopsided pancake landing on the floor. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a giggle. It was faint, almost unsure, like a sound she had forgotten how to make. I turned to her. "Was that you?" She covered her mouth, but her eyes crinkled with joy. "The pancake looked like a face," she said through a grin, like it was screaming. We both burst into laughter. It echoed through the small kitchen like sunlight warming the walls. I nearly cried, right then and there, standing barefoot on the linoleum floor with batter on my shirt. That was how healing came, not in one sweeping, magical moment, but in pieces, in spilled pancake batter, in bedtime stories, in coloring books. In long walks to the corner store where Emily could pick out a treat with her allowance. She was still shy, still quiet around strangers, but her voice came back, slowly, at first, only with me, then with Martha, who visited once a week to check in. Eventually, she spoke to her teacher at school, and then to the librarian at the desk when she returned her books. Books became our bridge. Emily devoured them. Fairy tales, chapter books, even nonfiction about animals. She read late into the night sometimes, flashlight under the covers. I let her. It made her feel safe. It made her feel free. I started attending support groups for women who'd survived abuse. At first, I barely spoke, just listened, hands folded in my lap. But when I finally opened my mouth, I found I had more to say than I thought. My voice had been quiet for so long. One night after a meeting, a woman named Clarice approached me. She had streaks of gray in her long braids and wore a cardigan with holes at the elbows. "You ever thought about working with kids?" she asked. I blinked. "Me, yeah. You've got a soft way about you, like someone who could sit with a child and just be there." I hadn't thought about it, not seriously, but the idea stuck. A few weeks later, I started volunteering twice a week at a center for children who had experienced trauma. I read stories, helped with snacks, sat with kids during quiet time. I didn't fix anything. I didn't try to. I just showed up. Every time, Emily started coming with me. At first, she stayed close, barely engaging, but after a while, She began to draw with the younger ones. She let them borrow her colored pencils. Sometimes she even read to them. And when one little boy cried during nap time and begged for his mom, Emily sat beside him and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." That moment, watching my daughter comfort another child the way no one had comforted her, shook something loose in me. We were surviving. No, more than that, we were beginning to live again. The nightmares didn't vanish overnight. There were still hard days, but they came less often. And when they did, we faced them together. One spring afternoon, we planted a small herb garden in plastic pots on the windowsill. "Basil," Emily said, labeling each pot with careful letters. "And thyme. Don't forget hope," I joked. She looked up at me. "That's not a plant." "No," I said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But it's growing in here." I tapped her chest. She smiled. "It's growing in you too." That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in decades. I wrote about courage, about fear, about the strength it takes to choose love when love has failed you before. And as I closed the notebook, I realized something. We weren't just recovering. We were rebuilding. By the time Emily turned 13, she had already lived through more pain than most people see in a lifetime. But you'd never know it by watching her. She walked a little taller, spoke a little clearer, and while there was still a softness in her that made her seem older than her years, there was also something new, resolve. One Saturday morning, we passed a flyer outside the library, community workshop, healing through art for children in crisis. Emily stopped in her tracks. "Can we go?" she asked. I blinked. Of course. That following week, we sat together in a room full of children and teenagers, all of them holding paintbrushes and silence like fragile glass. Emily chose a spot near the window and began painting swirls of color with an intensity I hadn't seen in her in a long time. The facilitator, a kind woman named Teresa, noticed her immediately. "She's focused," she whispered to me as Emily bent low over the canvas. "She's been through a lot," I replied. "I can tell," Teresa said, "but she's turning it into something beautiful." It wasn't long before Emily began attending every Saturday, and soon after that, she was asked to help lead the younger kids. She taught them how to use watercolors, showed them how to layer colored pencils for shading. But more than that, she listened to them, and they listened back. One little girl, around 6 years old, clung to Emily for most of one afternoon. Her mother had been hurt by a boyfriend, and the girl wouldn't speak to anyone until Emily sat beside her, drew a picture of a bunny, and whispered, "You don't have to talk. We can just draw." The girl nodded, and that was the beginning. Watching my daughter become someone else's comfort, someone's light in the dark, brought a kind of pride that words can't contain. It was quiet pride, deep and steady like the earth, and it inspired me. I went back to school just a few classes at first, at the community college. Counseling, social work, trauma-informed care. I was older than most of my classmates, but I had something they didn't lived experience. I'd been in the trenches. I'd felt the fear, the silence, the shame, and I had made it out. By the time I turned 65, I had earned a certification in crisis support services and started volunteering at a local women's helpline. My job wasn't to solve problems. It was to listen. I can still hear the voices of the women who called in, sometimes whispering, sometimes sobbing. "I don't know what to do." He said it was my fault. I'm scared to leave. And every time, I told them the truth. You're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're not alone. It became my mission. Emily's too. Together. We started a small outreach project called the Willow Bridge, named for the willow tree that used to grow outside our old home in Wallace, the one Emily would hide behind when she was little. We turned that symbol of fear into something healing. The project began with used backpacks. We filled them with essential soap, socks, granola bars, a notebook, and a handwritten note. Each note was different. Emily wrote some, I wrote others. Things like, "You matter. There is life after fear. You are not what he did to you." We distributed them to shelters, schools, and clinics. We never knew who received them, but that wasn't the point. The point was to remind anyone, that there's a hand reaching out, even if you can't see it yet. One chilly November morning, I got a letter in the mail with no return address. It read, "Thank you for the backpack. I read your note every night. I'm still scared, but I'm not alone anymore." That was all I needed to keep going. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret staying with Randall for so long, if I hate myself for not leaving sooner, and I tell them the truth. Yes, for years I did. But I also know now that healing is never clean. It's messy. It's slow. It's full of wrong turns and aching steps forward. What matters is that we made it. Emily is now in her 20s, studying psychology at Eastern Washington University. She wants to become a trauma therapist. "I want to help kids who don't know how to speak yet," she told me. The way I didn't. She still keeps her stuffed rabbit on her desk. She says it reminds her of how far she's come. As for me, I keep a photograph in my wallet, just a small Polaroid, of the two of us at the art center, both smiling with streaks of paint on our cheeks. It's not just a memory. It's proof that even the most broken hearts can heal, that even the smallest voices can grow strong again. The years passed like seasons, each one leaving behind something old, something healed, and something new. Emily and I never returned to Wallace, not once. We sold the house quietly with help from a lawyer Martha connected us to. I never went back to pack the boxes. I just told the realtor to send whatever she thought I'd want to keep, and she did my mother's old recipe book, a few framed photos, and the quilt Emily was swaddled in as a baby. The rest, it could rot for all I cared. That house wasn't a home anymore. It was a graveyard of everything we had endured. Randall was still in prison the last time I checked, 17 years into his sentence. No chance of parole, no contact with Emily. He once sent a letter addressed to me through a cousin of his, but it never reached my hands. The shelter intercepted it, and the lawyer filed a formal no-contact order. I never even read it. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry" doesn't erase the nightmares, doesn't rebuild a child's voice, doesn't make up for the nights I sat holding a kitchen knife, afraid of the man snoring in the next room. I didn't want his words. I wanted peace. And that's what I built. I now live in a small townhouse just outside Spokane. It has a garden out back where I grow tomatoes, lavender, and wild mint. I wake up early, feed the birds, and drink my coffee on the porch with Henry the tabby curled beside me. Emily visits every Sunday, sometimes with her friends from school, sometimes alone. We bake, we talk, we laugh. Last Christmas, she gave me a handmade journal. On the front, she had written to the woman who taught me to rise. Inside was a letter. I've never shared it with anyone until now. "Mama, you saved me in every way. You didn't just pull me out of the darkness, you sat with me in it, night after night, until I could breathe again. I know you blame yourself sometimes, but please don't. I wouldn't be who I am without your courage. You were my voice when I had none. And now I use mine for me and for the ones still waiting to be heard. Love. Emily. That letter sits by my bed. Some nights, when the silence feels too loud, I hold it in my hands and read it again. It reminds me that every small step we took, every phone call, every whispered promise, every sleepless night meant something. We didn't just survive Randall, we overcame him. People often think strength looks like something loud and bold, but I've learned that sometimes strength is a whisper in the dark. It's a woman holding her child's hand and walking into the unknown with nothing but faith in her chest. It's staying, and then, one day, it's finally leaving. When I look at Emily now, her shoulders straight, her voice calm, her heart wide open, I don't see a victim. I see a warrior. And when she calls me every week just to say, "Hi, Mama," like she used to when she was little, I know deep in my bones we made it. We made it. And no one can take that from us now. Some stories don't end with a grand finale. They end with a breath, a quiet sunrise, a cup of tea shared between a mother and her daughter, and that's enough. I used to think that survival meant never being afraid again, but I know better now. Survival means walking forward even when your knees shake. It means choosing to love again, even after love has betrayed you. It means waking up in the morning and saying, "Today, I'm still here." That's what Emily and I did. We stayed, we rose, we rebuilt. There were no parades, no fireworks, just ordinary days filled with soft victories, like Emily tying her shoes without flinching at sudden sounds, like hearing her speak in class again, like watching her cross the stage at her college graduation, eyes bright with a future no one could steal from her. And me, I found something too, purpose. I once thought I was just a woman who failed to protect her child soon enough, but I've learned that regret doesn't define you, what you do with it does. I chose to turn pain into something useful, to speak up, to help others, to say, "I believe you," when the world refuses to listen. That's what healing looks like. It's not perfect. It's not fast, but it is possible. And if you're reading this now, if you've ever lived in silence, ever been afraid to name what was happening to you or someone you love, I want you to know something. It is never too late to speak, never too late to leave, never too late to become the version of yourself you were always meant to be. You are not alone, and you never were. I thought the worst part of our story was the scream. That scream from Emily's throat, raw, choked, and desperate, haunted me for years. But now, I understand. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of truth, the beginning of change, the moment her pain demanded to be heard, and finally was. That voice may have broken from screaming, but it rose again, and now it sings. If you ever feel like your voice has been taken from you by fear, by control, by someone who told you that you were too small or too weak, remember this. Your voice is still inside you. It's waiting, and when you're ready, even if it shakes, even if it's just a whisper, it matters. Because your truth matters, and one whisper can save a life, just like it saved my daughter's, and just like it saved mine. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, whether it's something you've lived through, someone you've supported, or just a feeling that won't leave you. Your voice is welcome here. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, real, raw, and full of hope, please subscribe to our channel. Let's build a community where no one feels invisible, where silence is broken, and where healing is always possible. Thank you for listening to our story. From my heart to yours, you are never alone.